My name is Mark Halperin. I'm an editor-at-large at Time Magazine. And our guest today is one of those people, to use the cliche, but it's true in this case, who needs no introduction. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who, as all of you know, was at one point Times Man of the Year. Looks pretty much exactly the same. We're gonna have a fountain of youth question in here. Speaker Gingrich is really one of the most interesting people in American life today. From Diana West from Memphis, Tennessee. What will the next 6 months bring for the American dollar? Rattle the markets. Say something provocative.
No, look, the dollar right now is about where it was in 1995. My guess is the dollar will presently stabilize to the huge disadvantage of the euro and to the marginal disadvantage of the yen. And that the Chinese will probably try to stay as close to us as they can, because it's very interesting to me. Everybody runs around, I don't know how many of you thought about this. The Japanese have had an undervalued yen for 40 years because it's allowed them to maintain industrial production. The Chinese have a deliberately undervalued currency because it allows them to maximize industrial production. We have been complaining that both are undervalued. We now have a dramatically lower valued dollar, which is going to do, guess what? Dramatically increase American industrial production. The only zone where the dollar value matters to us is the purchase of oil. And we ought to have a national strategy of using energy that gets us away from depending on foreign dictators. And if we weren't buying foreign oil, we wouldn't care about the value of the dollar. Because the fact is, we will eat up the European competition. If the dollar-yen relationship, or the dollar-euro relationship stays, I think yesterday it was at $1.59 per euro. If we stay at $1.59, we are going to crush the European economy.
I'm going to take the segment.
Which is, I think, one of those sad things one has to feel bad about.
You've criticized the partisanship of Washington, but your time as Speaker of the House opposite President Clinton was known for extreme division. How do you explain this?
Well, I was a Republican creating a majority for the first time in 40 years and getting it reelected for the first time since 1928. And during that period, if you read my initial speech when I became Speaker, I talked about it being a series, the platform, the contract with America. Every single issue had a 70% or more approval of the American people.
But is your greater emphasis on the importance of bipartisanship and nonpartisanship in public policies, the search for public policy solutions, based on some lessons learned from that period?
I've watched us now, since the early 1980s, fail to solve the most fundamental problems in this country. I don't believe either party can force, because of the nature of our Constitution, which is a very deliberately difficult process, I don't think either party can force a narrowly partisan set of solutions. And so I think, almost like the progressive movement from 1896 to 1916, you have to have an American solutions movement which reaches out to Democrats and independents and which says, can we find issues we agree on? I'm not anti-partisanship, but that partisanship has to be selective. And I think President Clinton, if you read his memoirs, will tell you, I was always for helping the President of the United States in foreign policy. Because as an Army brat, I really do believe it is really dangerous to have the kind of stuff going on that we see right now, where the country is divided in foreign policy in a way which sends really dangerous signals to our opponents.
Give me your breakdown of potential general election matchups. Who is John McCain stronger against, Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama?
I think Senator Clinton has a lower ceiling and a higher floor. I think that she probably can't get much of a 53 or 54%. And she probably can't drop much below 47%. I think Senator Obama, if he turns out to be John F. Kennedy, could be at 58 or 59. If he turns out to be Dukakis and Mondale and McGovern, he could turn out to be at 42. So I think he's a bigger gamble for the Democrats in both directions. He could be a much better unifying national leader. John McCain has two challenges. He only has two challenges. The first is to be the non-Bush candidate. He can't be the anti-Bush candidate, but he has to be the non-Bush candidate. I think he has to do two simple things. He has to be the candidate of real change as opposed to the slogan. And I think he has to communicate the difference between McCain's America and Obama's America. And not attack Obama, but just say, look, if you'd have been comfortable sitting for 20 years in Jeremiah Wright's church, Obama's a perfect candidate. If you think that it's acceptable for Jimmy Carter to go meet with dictators and to go meet with Hamas, which after all, springs directly from Obama having said he'd go see every dictator without any precondition, then he's the perfect candidate. If you think raising every tax in the middle of a weak economy makes sense and is a great way to compete with China and India, he's a perfect candidate. But if you want entrepreneurs rather than trial lawyers, and you want more incentive for economic growth, not less, and you're prepared to take apart the Detroit school system until kids actually learn instead of going to jail, then you want McCain's world, not Obama's. Now, if he can create that rhythm, I suspect he wins the election this fall, and I suspect there's not much Obama could do to beat him.
As a military historian, how do you view the strategic blunders of your own party, and do you see a clear path for a resolution to the Iraqi occupation?
Well, I said in December of 2003 we'd gone off a cliff. I think the Bremer decisions in June of 2003 were an absolute total strategic fiasco. The president has to bear responsibility as commander-in-chief because he tolerated them. They fundamentally violated the premises of the campaign. They are absolutely wrong. They're indefensible. And when it's a little bit like our conversation about subprime mortgages. When rich people go out and think they're smarter than economics, they go broke. When political leaders decide they can violate all the rules of war, they get beat.
You had a former Secretary of Defense as the Vice President, intimately involved in this. You had a guy who'd already been Secretary of Defense a generation ago, one of the key architects. How could those two men with such experience play such a big role in something that you characterize as such a disaster? I
don't know what happened. I mean, I think one of the most interesting questions of this administration is what was going on in May and early June of 2003 that led them to accept a series of decisions which were patently unsustainable.
What's your guess?
I think there was such a huge power struggle internally between Powell in the State Department and Rumsfeld in the Defense Department, and that Rice was not imposing the president's will. Rice was negotiating between those two departments and Cheney. And they got sufficiently tired beating each other up in meetings that I think they all decided collectively they would delegate this to Bremer, who's a very smart man. But he is a very smart man. He was a Kissinger protege. And I would have thought going in that Bremer was the right guy. So I think they all just decided out of exhaustion, let him do it. So we now know, at least I've seen one report, that Bremer and the president apparently made the decision. Now, I have at times seen documents that are in the White House that are fundamentally different than this. So I don't know what happened. I'm not here blaming anybody. I think it is one of the most interesting and disastrous. I mean, nothing has crippled this administration more than what the administration did in the summer of 2003.
Is there a government decision in your lifetime that has crippled the United States more than this?
Oh, sure. Jimmy Carter's entire presidency. I mean, how can you look at 13% inflation, 22% interest rates, the Iranian hostage crisis, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the collapse in Grenada, Nicaragua, and El Salvador, and not say that was probably collectively a greater period of strategic stupidity than the decisions of June and July of 2003.
But the best president from Georgia in your lifetime?
The best president from Georgia in my lifetime, okay. which is a sad commentary. And by the way, let me just go out of my way to say, if he goes to Damascus and he meets with the head of Hamas, the Democrats should disinvite him from their convention, and he should become a person without any tolerance in this country.
The person from Time.com here who's filing spot news off of this event, let's go with that.
I mean, I feel very deeply that for him to meet with Hamas is an act of such total irresponsibility. He bears with him the burden of being a former president of the United States. He is not a free agent.
What do you think President Carter's worldview is that's so different from yours on that point?
I think President Carter represents exactly what Obama represents, a left-wing worldview which regards the United States as a bad country and which goes around the world trying to propitiate our enemies on the grounds that, I mean, if you read one of the great books of recent times, which is Guest to the Ayatollah by Mark Bowden, who's a fabulous writer who wrote Black Hawk Down, the Carter administration was just mindless in dealing with the Iranian hostage crisis. I mean, as Brzezinski said yesterday in defending Carter's decision to meet with the head of Hamas, it's really useful to meet with the head of terrorist organizations because you can ameliorate them. I mean, this is the mood that led to 444 days of hostage crisis, which ended exactly at the moment Ronald Reagan took office for a practical reason. Ronald Reagan was in touch with reality, and he had communicated with the Iranians that there were two futures, the one where they would no longer be in government, and the one where we got our hostages back, and he was happy with either future.